Welcome to episode 3 of the 6 M's of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Temple. I cannot think of a better guest for discussing today's subject of collaboration and team dynamics than Jim Fidel, founder of Carolina Training and Assessments. Jim has over 25 years of experience in senior leadership for Fortune 500 companies and has spent his career working in manufacturing. As a private consultant, he now works with organizations to maximize performance through leadership development, team alignment, and building a culture of collaboration. Let's get started on this exciting episode. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining me today and sort of digging into the topic of teams and team dynamics.
Thanks for having me, Adrienne. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I know that you do a lot of work with teams and working on team dynamics and how to make them more collaborative and performing at a higher level. And I think one of the things that we run into a lot with our clients even is, they have these friction points or these issues with their teams. It's like they're just not gelling or it's just not working. And I'm just curious from what you see when you're working with different folks. I mean, are the dynamics of teams or the teams just changing? I mean, what's different, or why are so many people stumbling through this whole team performance or collaborative teams process?
It's kind of messed up. I mean, it really seems to be that way. There's always lots of different reasons depending upon the organization and, what's going on. But if I could draw it down to a few things that seem to be common, there's this sense of I'm not really sure how to work with the other people on my team. We get to talking about what does collaboration really look like and what's it really mean. And, good effective teams that they trust each other. They engage in conflict. It's productive kind of conflict, which can be really awkward and kind of icky feeling to a lot of people. And if we can't trust each other and engage in conflict, then we can't start making really, really good decisions and committing to those decisions and holding each other accountable. So there's lots of things that go into teams and working well as a team that are counterintuitive to what we believe it should be, right? I mean, we're taught you need to be professional and courteous and all these other things when you're at work. And conflict is really good for a team, but it's got to be productive. But it feels icky, right? I mean, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and so people will shy away from it, and it's hard to hold your peers accountable to things. And so that kind of creates this environment where people are just kind of nodding their head and going along with things instead of really making good decisions and really looking out for the best interests of the team and the organization. And if I could draw it down to a single few topics, that's really what it is people just don't, the things that they might want to do naturally, they hold themselves back from doing it because it doesn't feel right. And then the things that should be done don't get done. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but if you and I work well together, or if we're working together on a team, we should be able to have a really good debate around what's the right decision. Are we doing the right thing? As awkward as that might be. And if we commit to something, you should be able to hold me accountable to not living up to my commitment. And that also feels really icky and weird. And so I think that's it, is people just don't understand how to behave. What are the rules of engagement for that team? They just kind of make it up. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah. Cool. So, and I mean, I mentioned to you before about, the whole Tuckman's stages of group development. A lot of people tie that back to team development. And I mean, it's kind of a tale as old as time, right? It's the forming and then the storming. And that's really where you're talking about. And then there's the norming and performing. And it sounds like the storming part is a bit of a stumbling block. I'm sure forming and creating, really clear roles and expectations is part of it. But in that storming piece is where, like you said, you got to go through the icky stuff, right? And there's just dynamics there that either if you don't do it, you'll never get to the norming, and definitely not the performing phase. So it sounds like from what you're saying, that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people.
Well, it is, and when you look at that model, right, the forming, storming, norming, and performing model, it's been around, like you said, for it's more than 50 years now, right? And and it's very memorable, right? All the words rhyme, and so it's easy to remember, and it kind of feels intuitive. Right. It also has limitations. So that model was for a very specific kind of application, right? It was for a research team on a particular project and, that kind of application. But because it's so memorable and because it feels intuitive, people have just really started to apply it kind of across the board. And that can kind of lead them into some landmines occasionally. So yeah, the stages are there. Mm-hmm. They look different for each team, and how you get through it is different. And so just saying to the team, hey, we're in the storming phase, right? Which is exactly what you said, right? If that's the conflict, that's the, what's my place, what's my authority, all those types of things. It's not enough just to say, hey, this is the stage we're in, we just got to get through it. This is the stage that we're in. How do we get through it? And how do we get through it as quickly and effectively as possible without leaving any scars on people? Mm-hmm. That's really what it is. And so like when I get called in to help with teams, a lot of it has to be, what are those rules of engagement? How do we get through this without the scars? And even when we're past that, how do we really start to norm around our roles and what does performance really look like? And so there's a lot more to it than just the four rhyming words that make, but yeah, I think that's it. People have to figure out their place and have to figure out what the rules of engagement are with each other.
Sure. Well, and there's so many different teams. I mean, I think, it's easy to look at it just from that perspective of, kind of like what you talked about. There's a research team, or we inside organizations, will put together small teams to work on a problem or work on a project. It's a short-term engagement, but at a broader level, you have teams that are fixed, right? Your leadership team, your management team, your supervisory team, these are people that are in fixed positions that have to collaborate consistently while they're in those, in those roles. And so there's more than just the project teams that you need to think about, right? It's how does my management team look? How do they collaborate, right? How do they learn to engage with one another and have that constructive contention or conflict? So it's interesting, it's like you said, it's not a one size fits all option. It's really, there's lots of different applications of kind of quote unquote teams and how to tackle all of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the nature of work today is that people can be on many teams all at the same time. And so now you've got all these different personalities going on, and how do I work with this particular leader? And okay, this is my leadership team. This is the team I'm on, but I got this project team over here and this project team over here, and it's entirely different dynamics. And it's kind of interesting. One of the things I do a little thing when we do these kind of sessions, right? Facilitate this stuff, and I'll go around the room, and if I've got an intact leadership team, for example, right, I'll go around to each person on the team. I'll say, how many people are on your team? How many people are on your team? And I'll go right around the table. And if there's 10 people, I might get 8 or 9 different numbers. And it's because each person is thinking about their employee group as my team. And when we talk about building cohesion and alignment within an organization, that's a mistake. See, if every person on that leadership team is thinking of their employee group as their primary team, then they make decisions and they behave in the best interest of that employee group. Well, if all 10 people are doing that, then we've got potentially 10 different prioritizations, 10 different decisions, 10 different versions of communications of messages, and all of a sudden we create misalignment in the organization. Instead, we should be thinking of our peer group as our primary team. Right? If you and I are the same level of the organization, you're my team. And in my employee group, they're a team too, but they're not my primary team. And so then you and I make decisions together. We prioritize together. You're accountable to me and vice versa. And now all of a sudden we start doing what's in the best interest of the organization instead of these individual little departments or functional areas. And if we can get that mindset change, especially on a leadership team, senior leadership team, all of a sudden alignment within the organization really starts to come together. Communication becomes much more consistent, and prioritization and goal setting, all that just really starts to fall into place. But I didn't mention that a few minutes ago, but I think that's really another part of the piece of the puzzle that stands out. Is we're taught and we're indoctrinated to think our employees are our team and we got to act in their best interests. Not necessarily. We got to act in the best interests of the organization. We can only do that if we change our mindset.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would say your default is to. I mean, if I think back to being in the plant, it was by default your team was your department that you were responsible for, right? So you always kind of didn't identify as a leadership team. You felt like you were smaller parts. Hey, this is my department, so this is my team, and I'm representing my team in this group setting, right? I mean, so you tended to get the silo effect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's totally, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what you get. The silo effect, right? Everyone's doing their own thing. And they're worried about their own interests. And
right.
that's toxic to an organization. Really.
It is. Yeah. It is.
Totally.
It actually creates, in my experience, a lot of friction when we start talking about strategic plans, or it's almost like you're there to defend your team, right, and fight for what you want. And again, I don't know if holistically any of that is good for the organization, right, because your focus is how's that going to impact my department, my team, right? So you're protecting the interests of that one core group, but probably not opening yourself up to how do we all contribute to the success of the organization? How does this impact the organization and therefore all of us? I would say that there's just for some reason that just sort of that dynamic happens, and then it does show up in those situations where you're doing something more strategically, and everybody is defending their department or their area of responsibility and trying to insulate from too much negative impact or anything that would be an inconvenience. And that's interesting that just having that conversation, it's a bit of an aha moment, right? That happens probably more times than not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, I've been in manufacturing my entire career, right? And we always had a joke, the manufacturing coat of arms is this, right? We're always competing with somebody else. And what you're talking about is exactly right. And so we get in these meetings, and, I'm a director level, or I'm a senior manager or manager, whatever it happens to be, with my peer group. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to argue for what's best for my employees or my functional area, which may not be in the best interest of the company. And if you and I are going to work well together on a team, I got to trust and believe that your intentions are good, right? And you can vice versa. And if you know that I'm going to argue just for my team and I don't really care about what it means to the organization, then that diminishes our ability to work in a trusting relationship as coworkers. So you're absolutely right. I see it all the time.
Well, how do you, let's say that you have a situation like that where you've got those dynamics happening, however they came to be. Where do you even start to try and overcome something like that? Because, it just seems like it happens over time, and we start accepting that as, a bit of how things are done. And it always leads to, strategic plans never actually being implemented, or to the degree that they could be. Let's just say it's not, really meeting expectations. But how do you look at that and go, okay, we need to change this? Where do you even start in unpacking something like that when it's happening real time inside your organization or your leadership team?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's just, to me, it starts with awareness, and it's awareness on a lot of different things. So I have to raise my level of awareness on, let's just come back to you and me working on a team. I got to raise my level of awareness of your working style, your communication style, your motivators, your stressors. What are the types of situations that really engage you and kind of drive your passion? And what are the things that really make you kind of shy away from it or call stress or whatever it is, and vice versa. And we've got to understand how our lens on the world works for each other. And that's the first part, is raising that awareness. But then immediately on the heels of that is I've got to be willing to see things through your lens so that you and I can connect better as coworkers. And so we talk a lot about, do people understand what needs to be done? And then if they understand it, do they want it enough? And this whole thing of adjusting to people, it's about willingness, right? We can all behave and we can all approach things, whatever is necessary for the person in the situation. We just got to be willing to do it. And we talk about behaviors being situational and learned, and that's what it is. So we learn we got to behave differently in different situations. Whether we do or not is totally up to us. We just got to be willing to do it. So it's this awareness thing. I got to be aware of how we work. And then that opens the door to what I'm going to call talking about the elephants in the room. And every team's got them. I mean, they just do, right? I mean, there's certain ways that people talk to each other and we engage each other, and there's always elephants in the room. We get in these team meetings, and you get into these meetings, and sometimes you go in there, one person talks, and everybody else goes silent, right? Because they just don't want to deal with that person, right? It happens. It just does. And so there's these elephants in the room, and it's the elephants in the room that really get in the way of working well together. And so if we can raise the level of awareness and kind of create this foundational thing of, hey, you know what? This is normal. This happens everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the best thing we can do is talk about the elephants in the room. And there's tools and assessments and things that we can do to facilitate that. But ultimately, it boils down to that. We've got to talk about the elephants in the room and have really honest conversations. And once we can start doing that, then we can now start to talk about how do we fix it? How do we engage each other differently? I'm telling you, I've had some really interesting conversations with some teams, and depending on how deep the wounds are or how big the elephants are, conversations can get really kind of deep. They really can. But that's okay. That's part of it. We have to be able to have those conversations if we're going to have any hope of fixing it. That was a long answer to your question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but that's really the nature of it.
No, it's a really good point. And I do think, people sometimes, like you said, the elephant is in the room and usually has a reserved seat somewhere in the corner for every meeting, and it's there and everybody just knows it's sitting there. But what's the cost? What's the cost of choosing not to address exactly that in your mind?
Man, I'm telling you, the cost could be everything from we're not producing as efficiently and effectively as we could be. So you talk about profitability and productivity and uptime and reject rates and all those kind of KPI stuff. But beyond that, it can be as big as it could be the undoing, depending on the size of the organization, those types of things. It can be the undoing of the very fabric of the organization. And here's why. It doesn't matter what your technology is, what your process is, what your materials are, what your equipment is, all those other things. You got proprietary information, great, good for you. But here's the thing. Give your competition enough time and enough motivation, and they can duplicate anything that you do except for your teams, right? And so teamwork becomes the best competitive advantage that any organization has. And I don't know if really people get that, but it's true. And good, effective, cohesive teams, they're unstoppable. They really are. And teams that are dysfunctional and misaligned and all, they're easy to defeat. They really are. You don't really have to try very hard. They defeat themselves. So if somebody says, hey, I know we're messed up and I know what the issues are, but I'm choosing not to do anything about it, then I would kind of walk away from that conversation knowing that they're probably not going to make it. They're just not. So I
can only imagine. Just the sense of defeat daily of having to deal with that, and then never seeing it addressed. Right. So if you're a part of that team and you recognize there's these issues and we're never trying to solve it, personally, that's defeating. Like you said, the team is not performing to the level that they could. But like you said, I do believe that it's probably very underrated. This whole concept of team and collaborative team sometimes is highly underrated, but you make a very good point to tie it back to your competition, right? If you have a really, really strong team, that's something that somebody else can't necessarily take from you or replicate for that matter, right? You've really got something strong there that other people can't necessarily compete with. But I think you put it in a really good context in a way that's meaningful to other people as to why it's even important to work on this stuff. It brings up a good question though. We talk about, there's all different ways, I guess you could look at your team in general. So you talked about different communication styles or the things that people get really excited about and are very passionate about, or the things that really don't interest them and they really feel like they're working against their their strengths on. How are you able to really uncover some of that? Or what are some ways that you can start to assess your team? Or how would you use that information? Like it's almost, how do you uncover it? And then how do you know how to apply it in a way that's going to move the needle on your team performance or your team cohesiveness or collaboration from your perspective?
Sure. So, there's lots of different approaches, lots of different assessments out there. What we at CTA, we use exclusively everything DISC for trying to uncover these types of things. And, I don't want to, go into anything commercial or anything like that, but here's what I would tell you. There are assessments that are out there that will help uncover the nature of those things that you just mentioned. So I call it the lens on the world, right? So my lens impacts the way that I communicate. It impacts the way that I engage people. It impacts the way I approach different situations and events. And the key is to get that information. And again, there's plenty of assessments out there, but the key is to get that information, but it's got to be more than just a conversation piece. We've got to be able to get that information and put it into a very applicable way. So, for example, for DISC, for example, we talk about DISC and dominance and influence, and steadiness and conscientiousness is kind of the major quadrants. And it's one thing for me to understand that somebody might have an I style or a D style or whatever it is. So what? The key is, what do I do with that? And what are some really very actionable ways for me to adjust the way that I think and the way that I approach things now that I know what that person's style happens to be? And then that opens the door to, well, but if my style is the opposite or very, very different, then, it's going to be really hard for me to make that adjustment. Yes, it might be. That's where the willingness piece comes in. So again, long answer to your question. Sorry. The short answer is there are assessments that are out there that are highly reliable and highly validated to give teams that information. Everything DISC is one of those for sure. It absolutely. Yeah. So, but there are others out there. When we talked about things like Working Genius, which is the latest work from Patrick Lencioni, which is a really good view on what are the 6 things that all jobs require, and what are people's biases, what are the things that they crave, what are the things that crush them when it comes to doing the work. And again, it's all around this awareness thing. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, you did. It is the more I think about this, I've done a lot of assessments just in my professional career. I mean, I've seen them used multiple times. We've gone through these exercises to fill out all these different things. And I think probably the missing piece in a lot of cases was the application of it, right? So yes, you did the exercise. Yes, you got the results. The individual got the results, that kind of thing. But then what you find is, what do we really do with it? So it's not actually actionable, right? I didn't take anything and learn from it and apply it differently with someone, so that's probably a missing piece, and where people sort of fall short is taking the time to go through the exercise, but then not going that extra mile, like you said, laying out, now, how do we use this information to our benefit as a team, or, whatever the case may be, whether it's how people communicate or those things that, like you said, some things that crush people versus the things that really fulfill them and really energize them. Sometimes it's taking that extra step that gets overlooked in a lot of cases. We do the exercise, but then don't actually use the information to the benefit of the organization and the individuals in it, right?
Absolutely. And just so, for example, with this Everything DISC product, so we can take we call it the DISC map, right? Just put everybody's dots on the circle from the team, and just looking at the pattern of the dots, we can decipher things like the culture of that team. We can decipher things like what are their inherent biases, what are the things that are going to be, what's the environment that they're creating, depending on where they are in the organization, either for the organization or their individual groups, and how does that impact their potential employees and employees with different styles? How are they reacting to that? It's kind of like the blood test of a team. We can look at that dot map location and really draw lots of things out of that on why are decisions not being made quickly or effectively? Why are they revisiting decisions? Why don't we get the commitment? Why don't we see the results that we want to see? All that we can interpret from a DISC map. And gets so much further than just saying, well, what animal are you? You know what I mean? It's just, there's a lot of them that are out there that do that. And again, I just come back, people who work with me, know this, that's one of my favorite questions. So what? All right. So you're a gorilla or a bear or whatever. So what? What are you going to do with it? And so the key is, how do we take this information and turn it into something that matters? And it's so important. It's so important. It really, really is. But,
well, yeah. I mean, so, we talked some about this before, but what I find to be a pattern of behavior is, and it's not necessarily wrong. It's just kind of what we settle into. But when we look at putting teams together for different things, whether it's strat planning or it's some other problem solving situation, we tend to focus on, I'd almost call like job function affinity or tiers of responsibility. So your strat plan is your leadership team, right? Your management team, I'll say most of the cases, it's your management team, and you put them all in a room. And I guess this is where understanding some of these dynamics or having this type of information about what your team or this particular team is comprised of, it would be really helpful to understand that, because maybe you're missing something that you really need to have in there for them to really, for the whole team to really ignite and execute at a high level, right? So we tend to get very focused on creating our teams around common job responsibilities or getting somebody else from this department to get their input. But then it's what's inside that team at that point, like you said, how they communicate or how they think about things or where they really get fired up and excited. We don't have those data points. So we just sort of go by those loose indicators of like, this makes a good team to address this, right? And it feels like there's something missing when you do that. Sometimes you don't get what you expected to get, even though you put them together by job types or responsibilities or things that they had in common. You didn't look at it through any other lens than just that. I mean, it seems like to me there's something missing there when you do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I think part of the veil that's on this is that we pay attention to what people do well. And we automatically assume that not only do they do it well, but it kind of drives them. So let me give you an example. I absolutely hate to paint a room. Absolutely hate it. But I'm good at it, right? I'll put the painter's tape up, and I'll make sure all the lines are straight, and it's really good. And I make sure there's no streaks, and it looks good. At least I think it does. It looks good when I'm done. And people say, "Wow, you're really good at that." But I hate it. Absolutely hate it. The thought of painting a room just makes me want to rip my fingernails out. But so we do this. So in the workplace, then we see that somebody might be good at doing something, but that doesn't mean it drives them. And so it's about understanding what drives you. And if it drives you, you're going to be good at it. But we can be good at things that don't drive us either. And, kind of, again, talking with this whole working genius thing, if we get too much of this stuff that, crushes us or kind of diminishes our energy, even though we might be very adept at doing it, the people give us more of that stuff, and it just starts to drain on us. It just, I don't like doing this anymore. And so important that we understand what are the things that drive us and what do we drive our teammates, right? What drives each other, so that we can look for opportunities to give more of that to the people to the ones that are driven by those things. And again, it's not meant to be an exoneration, right? Well, I'm really good at these two. I really love these two things, so that's all I'm going to do. No, life doesn't work that way. You've got to be able to do this, right? But if I can just shift the proportion a little bit more to the things that really drive me, then job satisfaction starts to go up, right? I mean, that's really what it's all about. But it goes more than that. So something is totally off topic is time management. You think about, what are the things that drive me? What are the things that I'm really good at? What are the things I really enjoy? And I've got a list of things that I need to get done. Well, my natural instinct is to go do the things that I really like to do, the things that really drive me. Well, that might be the absolute wrong priority system to use for the best interest of the company, right, or the organization. And so even as something like time management, can be impacted and driven by our working genius or our disc style or anything like that. I mean, it's just such a far-reaching implication. It really, really is. I'm getting a little bit excited about this, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it hadn't even occurred to me, but you know what you're talking about. That's absolutely true, right? I mean, your inclination would be to try and spark some joy through your day, right? So you'll do the things that you're energized by, and then the other stuff, it's really like pulling teeth to finally address it. But the misalignment with priorities is probably a very real thing, but you don't think it goes that deep, right? We're just assuming just the basic stuff in everyday work life, right? As long as you're doing some activities that bring you joy, and there's others that, aren't your favorite thing that you can execute, but you don't think about getting that granular. So, and time management is a challenge for a lot of people, and prioritization is a challenge for a lot of people. I'm not an all-star at time management myself. It's a constant struggle. I try and, there's a book or, eat the frog first. I'm constantly trying to choke the frog down first, but you do the things you don't like first. But to your point, it's funny, I would not have thought those dynamics go that deep, but what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it really does. I mean, it matters. You think about the manufacturing environment, and it's fast paced, it's chaotic. I mean, depending upon the nature of what you're doing, right? Some places maybe not, but generally speaking, especially if it's a high production kind of thing, it's fast paced, it's chaotic. You don't know what's coming from minute to minute, let alone from hour to hour, and so we can very quickly fall into this mode of I'm just fighting the fire that happens to be the biggest and the hottest right now, maybe the closest to me. And so time management is nothing. I mean, it doesn't even exist. And so how do we break that cycle? Well, this is part of the conversation, right? If I understand what my biases are, where I really go, then I might get a greater understanding of how I contribute to the chaos, because we do, right? And so we're very quick to put it out on others, but we've got to accept some responsibility in it as well. We really do. And that's part of it. It's just such a far-reaching thing.
Well, and I'm curious just, to get some perspective on what drives people to engage in these types of things. I mean, with the people that you've worked with, and those folks that are willing to engage and kind of saying, okay, let's back up and really look at our team and how to improve their overall performance and maybe help to, again, elevate based on things that they really want to get engaged in. I mean, what is the driving factor behind that choice of making that step, right? I mean, there had to be something there that brought them to that decision point and say, we have to do something different. What have you seen that's kind of been the key motivator for folks to look differently at their teams and start investing some time in really unpacking all that and figuring out how to kind of give them a boost in performance?
Yeah, so there are certainly some symptoms that happen, right? So, wow, just off the top of my head. So most people will start with we didn't hit our KPIs, for the last 3 quarters in a row. What's going on here? We've tried everything we know to try, but we're still not making it happen. We've got what I'm going to call is unhealthy or unproductive conflict on our team. People don't get along well. People don't make good decisions. Sometimes you'll get HR issues that crop up, whether it's an engagement survey or a complaint or something about, supervisor or leader. There's generally going to be some problem that doesn't go away. And the nature of kind of who we are, we try and fix things based on what we think will work, based on past experience, whatever it is. And the solutions don't work anymore. And so now we're like, uh-oh, what do we do now? And usually that's the point when someone says, maybe we're looking at the wrong thing. Maybe we need to start looking at this team. And what I'm going to say is come away from the metrics stuff and come over to the squishy stuff, the human stuff. And every job's got 2 parts, what you do and how you do it. So what are the metrics? The how, not process how, but behavioral how. How do we engage each other? How do we treat each other? Well, and again, mostly in manufacturing, we get wrapped around the metrics. That's where we're at. And we tend to make the squishy stuff secondary. Well, once we've tried all the solutions we know over here, this is all that's left. And so often I'll get phone calls from organizations or, emails or whatever it is and say, hey, we need help. And I'll say, what's going on? And inevitably, they're going to talk about numbers that they're not hitting. They're going to talk about personnel clashes or personality clashes or, that kind of stuff that's going on that they just can't seem to fix. It inevitably comes back to that.
That's good to know, because I think anybody who might be listening to this, just kind of understanding what might be some indicators for you to pay closer attention to and kind of say, okay, have we even asked this question of ourselves? Is there something there with our team that we could address or help with, or, take a deeper look at just to get better understanding? I think it's always good for people to kind of know what are those things to look for, or what has driven other organizations to take that step into looking at that phase of it. Because like you said, it's the human side. But there's a lot of merit to the human capital that you have inside your organization. We sometimes, like you said, get very metric focused and tend to not want to get too much on the human side, just because it's a sticky wicket, right? That's a lot going on there, a lot to unpack. But obviously there's value in doing it for your organization. And I guess that's what it would lead me to for this next question is, have you seen, or could you give an example of, just in a general sense, of the impact it's had for an organization to take that step? Have you had one that was kind of, hey, we're at this point and just don't know where to go from here, and you've actually seen them make a jump or have a success after they've taken that time to really look at their teams and the dynamics of their teams? Do you have a really good example of that? Just in a general sense of what's possible if you really invest that time and effort in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a few. I certainly won't, mention any company names or anything like that. But so right off the top of my head, I can think of three organizations, three companies, all manufacturing companies, who were struggling to execute on their strategic plan. They were struggling to grow the business and hit their financial metrics. And what it really came down to was they couldn't get their organization aligned. And they went after efficiencies, and they went after, process flow, and they went after layout and material flow and all those other things, thinking that it was a cost-based kind of thing. But then when the strategies weren't playing out, all of a sudden it was, okay, this is much bigger than what we have. And so by coming in and working with those leadership teams, and incidentally, one of the three I started working with almost 9 years ago, but the other two then were with them for the last 5 years. We've been working with them, but here's what happens. So we start getting the teams aligned, and we start talking about clear expectations, clear prioritizations, clear strategic planning with what are the goals, and then gaining commitments on the top priorities. And that's really kind of part of the deal, is what are the things that are most important. The entire team, the entire organization commits to those things, and we hold each other accountable to doing that. And these three that I'm thinking about off the top of my head have broken through to the next level of growth in all three cases. So, for example, one of them nearly tripled their revenue in 6 years. The other two are at about double right now in the last 4.5 years, call it. So nearly have doubled their revenue. Engagement scores gone up significantly. One of them has made it to the best places to work for multiple consecutive years. So it has far-reaching implications. It really does. And I had the owner and CEO of one organization approach me. This is actually not so long ago. And we've become friends over the years. And we were having lunch. And he said, Jim, I want you to understand something. When the first time I met you, I guess I never really understood. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I never really understood what we were missing. And I want you to know that much of the success we have and are enjoying today is in part due to what you've taught us as a leadership team. We're working totally differently today than we were 5 years ago. We're seeing our business and our competition and our customers differently than we ever have. We're prioritizing like we've never done before. It matters. And so it's it's a fulfilling thing. It really is. I'm doing this because I love it. And so, yeah, I mean, there are plenty of examples that are out there where companies have gone to the next level. They've hit their revenue growth. They've hit their strategic plans where they had never done it before.
Yeah, that's significant. I mean, that's really, wow. It's good to hear those types of things. And the reason that I ask that is because I do want people to understand that it does pay dividends to look at all facets of your organization, and including your teams and alignment of your teams, even though, like you said, that's more on the human side and this maybe the squishy stuff, right? It pays dividends. And sometimes we need to hear that other people have had success and broken through barriers doing that, because it might seem very uncomfortable for us and we might not want to touch that stuff. But like you said, that might be the untapped potential that was just sitting there the whole time, and you just didn't want to dig into it. So that's really, I mean, that's pretty powerful results from taking that next step and looking at their teams. That's really amazing. That's awesome to hear that kind of success happening for those organizations. So that's huge.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's really a good thing. And I just wish everybody would get that, right? I mean, and I'm an engineer, right? I've been a manufacturer. I'm about the metrics. I get it. We don't think about the squishy stuff. I get it, but it's so important. It really, really is. It matters.
Well, and it's becoming more and more important. And I guess that's, something I'll kind of wrap up with, but because I'm just curious, I mean, our teams are changing, right? I mean, our workplace is changing. There's still 5 generations in the workforce right now, I think, still actively in the workforce together, but our teams are changing. We're having a changing of the guard in a lot of ways, right? So that more now than ever, I would say, you've really got a lot of movement inside your teams, even in well-established management teams or leadership teams that have been around for a while. So it's really timely to be looking at those types of things. Do you see in the work that you've been doing around this topic matter more recently, have you seen more people setting standards to actually do assessments or regular exercises with their teams like this? I mean, just to kind of get everybody on the same song sheet, especially when you have new people coming in, to retain a level of a culture that they're, consistently happy with. I mean, do you see people making this more of a standard of how we operate? When we get new team members, then we make sure everybody's acclimated to this is how we operate. Do you see more of that happening because of the shift inside of leadership teams and sort of people retiring, new people coming in? I mean, what are you seeing with that?
Yeah, people talk about the different generations and what that means. And we talk about, well, the kids today, they don't have the same values that I did. And you hear that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And here's what I think, to answer your question, Adrian, it's not about age values or generational values. There's a component of that, but it's not that. Most people have the same fundamental core values through the course of time. What has changed is the need for collaboration is significantly higher today than it was even just 10 years ago. And collaboration looks and feels different to different people and to different organizations. But once we can understand that it is really about collaboration, it really is around seeking to understand other people's perspectives and being receptive and open to the possibility that I might be wrong and you might be right. It's almost a paradigm shift for a lot of organizations. And once they realize that it's the collaboration piece that's missing, the next question is how do we navigate through that? And the use of assessments is growing very quickly. Not only the use of them, but the application of them. And so I think as this catches on and as people really see this collaborative culture is so important, it's not about changing a KPI. It's about understanding people's style, personality, and work styles, and those are done through assessments. And it really, really is becoming mainstream in a lot of ways. It really is. And I'm very thankful for that. I mean, because it really does improve the organization. So,
yeah, clearly the impacts are there, right? I mean, just the things that you've referenced, there's definitely value, return on investment in taking that next step and really engaging in that type of activity. So it's interesting that it's continuing to grow in terms of more people doing it. But I think there's more of a focus right now on the human side of the business as well, right? And that's been a shift in recent years as well, is really looking more at the human side of the organization as a whole in a lot of different ways. And I think maybe in assessments and that type of thing, you are looking a little bit deeper into the individual and then how they fit into the larger piece of the organization. So it's interesting that that's a trend that's continuing to grow. I hope more people will invest in that. I think if you can say someone's grown their sales and they're hitting their KPIs and they're breaking through barriers simply by taking a different look at their team and their team dynamics, I'd like to think that more people would look at that more critically and say, should we not be looking at this too? I mean, you always want to be better than you were yesterday, right? So if there's something there to be gained, you would hope that people would look more critically at that and ask those hard questions of themselves and say, should we look at this a little bit closer?
Yeah, I agree 100%. 100%. And if I could boil that down to a single one, if I could take just a few more seconds, what I'll tell people is our thoughts become our behaviors become our habits, and our habits become our reputation. So if you want to change your reputation, you want to change your habits, you want to change your behaviors, you got to start by changing your thoughts. And so we've got to think about things differently than we did before if we want to change the downstream effect. And that's really what this is about.
That's a perfect way to end this podcast. I think that's a solid way to close things out. But I really appreciate it, Jim. We always have such good discussions, but I think this is definitely a hot topic and something that continues to be discussed whenever we meet with clients. And obviously you're seeing that as well. So I'm glad you had the time to share this with us today.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. I appreciate being a part of this and thank you again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the 6 M's of Manufacturing podcast. Many thanks to our guest, Jim Fidel, for sharing some of the barriers to creating cohesive teams and some of the steps that can be taken to break through to a new level of collective team performance. Visit the episode notes for reference links to information shared during today's discussion. Like what you heard? That's awesome. Follow our podcast and share with your network. And remember, don't just make it better.